Well, we'll get started. So Scott and Marissa got stuff to do, I'm sure, like we all do. So I'll just introduce Scott real quick. Scott Bishop is currently the NCEES Western Zone Assistant Vice President. He is on a regular outreach volunteer for NCEES K through 12 outreach events, including representing the organization at Discover Ease, Family Day, and Future City competitions. Scott is a licensed in Utah, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado, and is a certified federal surveyor. Graduated from Idaho State University in 2004 with a bachelor's degree in geomatic technology. And I had to let somebody in, sorry. After graduation, he spent 6 years as a BLM cadastral surveyor surveying the Southwest Utah. He left the BLM for a private sector and has been there ever since. He has taught surveying courses at Southern Utah University, Utah Valley University, and is currently on the advisory board for Utah Valley University, Idaho State University, and Salt Lake Community College. Scott is currently a principal at Horrocks Engineers and manages their right-of-way department. He serves as an expert witness on multiple cases and has served as an acting city and county surveyor. He is active in the Utah Council of Land Surveyors Association and was recognized as the 2015 Utah Council of Land Surveyors Surveyor of the Year. He spends most of his free time keeping up with his wife and 4 daughters and trying to get out of the office as much as possible, which we all do. But during these times, that doesn't happen very often. So Marissa is also on here. Marissa works for NCEES, for those of you who don't know Marissa. And between the two of them, definitely kind of fill us on everything, the history of NCEES, value of licensure, and everything that we want to continue on with our licensure and any of those wanting to get licensed. So without further ado, we'll turn it over to Scott. And,
hey, thanks, Trent. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
If anybody wants to feel like an idiot, just sit here while someone reads about you, right? It's just so awkward. Like
it is.
What do? You just got to sit there and take it, right?
I know, it's funny.
yeah, super awkward. So, hey, I'm really glad to be here. Hopefully I'll be able to answer all your questions. I've got a little presentation I can go through, but if you've got questions, by all means, let's get them answered. That's what we're here for. I think of where I am. I still think I'm a newly licensed guy. I'm not. I've kind of been around the block a little bit. But it's interesting where I got to be where I am. So like I say, if you have questions, jump in and we'll kind of go through these. Marissa, feel free to jump in and correct me when I say something that I shouldn't say. So we're going to talk a little bit, obviously, about the surveying profession. And what we want to cover today is who and what NCEES is. I know personally, NCEES to me was the people that put on 2 exams that I had to pay to get licensed. That was all I knew about NCEES when I started down my path as a licensee. So we'll talk about who and what NCEES is. We'll talk about the value of licensure and why to be licensed, and what NCEES is currently doing to promote the profession. And then, of course, we're going to be able to answer any questions anybody's got, hopefully. If not, I can find the right people who will be able to answer any of those questions. Okay, so who is NCEES? What is NCEES? So here's the super canned, standard answer, right? We just celebrated a 100-year anniversary this year. Well, we didn't really celebrate it. This year was our 100-year anniversary, and we didn't do anything because we didn't meet together and do, well, whatever. Everybody gets that. So why did NCEES come about, and what are we supposed to do? Well, we promote licensure by improving laws and promoting mobility. Our statement, and you'll see as we go through some of these things, NCEES, and the next slide is going to kind of show that of who we are. But that last bullet down there, right? NCEES is made up of all the licensing jurisdictions in the country. And this goes for both engineers and surveying. Some of these actually are a little bit broader than that. So who are we? So this the top thing right there, there's 69 boards. Well, if you say, hey, Scott, there's 50 states and a couple of jurisdictions, how do we get to 69? Well, you've got one structural only board. I think Illinois is the one that has 3 distinct licensing boards. They have an engineering board, a surveying board, and a structural engineering board. There's 28 boards that have dual or multiple jurisdictions they license. Some of them license architects, interior designers, decorators, those types of things, the multi-professionals. There's 13 survey-only boards. and then 11 engineering boards. So you add all those up, that equals 69, and that's how we got to that number. Hopefully that makes sense. 566. Well, I'm kind of not one of those anymore. You know, each licensing board. So in Utah, I'll share my story of how I got to be where I was. I was heavily involved with our state professional society, and was on the state board. And I was from down in southern Utah, you know, southwest Utah, young licensee. I'm not quite sure how I got involved with that, but God, I wanted to give back to the profession, help out. And much like probably everybody that's on here feels the same way, want to be part of something. So got involved with some conferences, some outreach opportunities, and I ended up on the state licensing board. Well, sitting in a licensing board meeting, the conversation came up of, hey, we need to appoint someone to the state licensing board from our professional association. And they talked about the Salt Lake County surveyor and all the who's your daddies of surveying in Utah. Well, I'm 32 years old, this kid down in Southwest Utah. I'm like, hey, that'd be kind of cool, whatever. Throw my hat in the ring. I forgot about it. I was down in Phoenix, Arizona, construction staking a Tanger outlet building. I had some rodmen that they just got to go down there to help with me. And I got a phone call saying, hey, you've been appointed to the board and we have a board meeting next Thursday. Can you make it? Well, I'm just elated, right? Because to me, that was a big deal to be appointed to the state licensing board and all that kind of stuff. And got this kid who doesn't know anything about surveying, and I got no one to share this highlight of my life and career. And so, yeah, I just I sat in my hotel room that night, called my wife. I'm like, hey, guess what? And I remember calling my boss, or when I got back into town, I said, hey, this is what's happening. And he's like, oh, absolutely. We totally support you. We think it's great. The next day he said, hey, come back and let's talk. He's like, how much time commitment is this going to be? Right. I mean, you can all appreciate that, taking time off. Well, that was 8 years ago. So in Utah, I served 2 4-year terms. And at my second term there, I ran for a position as the Western Board representative. So there's four zones. They broke the country up into 4 different zones. So I represent the Western 15 states and territories. We've got Guam, Northern Mariana Islands, and Alaska and Hawaii, and the western part out here. And so I was one of those 566 individual members. So when people talk about NCEES, it's really a group of individuals who are on their state licensing boards. Not all 566 people are engaged or want to be involved with NCEES. They're busy, they've got other things going on. But I have found going to meetings and being pretty heavily involved that they're good people. They really care about the profession. They're not only involved with the profession, but they're involved with Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and civic organizations, getting on the planes. You know, they're just good people that are willing to donate that time. I was an anomaly and kind of still am. You know, as a 32-year-old, I hope you can appreciate, right? Most people on their state licensing boards are political appointees. They were selected by the governor, and it's a who's your daddy, who do you know kind of a deal. Man, 32-year-old kid from Southwest Utah, you know, I was a freak. And so we'd go to these meetings and it was the young guy, right? People want to talk. And so of course, NCEES used me up pretty quick to outreach, go to meet with the young kids and student activities, because now they've got someone that's young, that's not the 70-year-old person. I'm starting to get gray, but you know what I mean? And so it was kind of interesting to have that perspective and be able to contribute and to bring a voice. You know, one of the things NCEES did when I was there is they created an emerging leaders group. Not because of me, but, you know, in my first couple of years, and I was able to chair that group, and they brought in professional engineers and surveyors who had been licensed just a couple of years or were on the path to licensure to get their ideas and sounding boards, and they're looking at bringing that back. So that's kind of who NCEES is. I like to say it's the licensing boards from all the jurisdictions, and it's not just engineers and surveyors necessarily. Any questions kind of about who, where, what, why NCEES? We'll kind of get more into why NCEES, but that's kind of who they are and the makeup is.
Do board members change very often?
Yeah, they do. And again, some of them, everything is state specific. It changes. So Utah, I'll speak, you know, that's where I know. It's a 2 4-year terms. Some individuals only run four years and they're done, they're out. Some states, it's kind of a lifetime deal. Most of them have some limits. It's 6 or 8 years, and they stay on their board until appointed, until replaced. Well, you can imagine the political climate that we live in right now. Sometimes licensing boards are not on the top of the priority of the governor's list of things to get filled. So some people have been on their board, kind of that floating for years, for 2 or 3 years, because they just haven't been replaced yet. So yeah, there is definitely some turnover every year. There's definitely some familiar faces, but yeah, there's definitely some turnover in and out through there. Okay, so why NCEES? Well, you know, the pendulum swings both ways. 1891 was when the first surveying was the first license, and then engineering came in 1907, but it often comes as a result of a disaster. So in Texas, there was a school that blew up from a gas leak in 1937. Well, Texas created an engineering and licensing board. After that happened, they said, hey, we can't have this happen. You know, and so right now the pendulum's kind of swinging more towards the side of, hey, let's deregulate. We need to have commerce and our economy to get going, and all these regulations are slowing things down. Let's deregulate all these professions. Well, we'll have a natural, or not a natural disaster, but some type of technical disaster, and everybody, the pendulum will swing back clearly the other way. Hey, we got to regulate all this stuff. Things got to be reviewed. And so there's a huge ebb and flow throughout time as to how and why licensure is important, and politically driven sometimes, and economically driven. And like I say, it's in a state of flux, but right now I think it's pretty safe to say the pendulum's on the deregulation side of things. I know several states the governors are looking at deregulating and making it easier to get licensure, which I fully support. I think it's a great idea to make licensure more accessible. But we'll talk about some kind of the core things that need to be there to make sure, because it's just important to make sure that the roads we're driving on, the buildings we're going into, are going to be safe and not fall apart, right? So NCEES today, this first bullet, this is, again, all of us know NCEES because we had to pay them a couple $100 and take the exam. And it's like this big dreaded black box of, I don't know who, where, what. And so, yeah, they develop the exams. They maintain a model standard, and they have model laws and model rules. And again, each licensing board is a member of and contributes. NCEES, they have an annual meeting where they vote. It's a very formal meeting, very structured, Robert's rules. They pass motions, and they create these model standards that say, hey, to be a licensee in this country, here's the model, here's what the benchmark should be. And that is determined by all the licensing boards. So it's not like it's one person in the back room making this decision. There's pretty vigorous debate through the whole process. So they come up with these definitions, and the thought process is these states will go back and implement those into their states. Well, some things do. I remember they were looking at the civil engineers to require a master's, a bachelor's plus 30 to become a civil engineer. Well, it's funny, NCEES passed a motion and said, hey, this is what we want to have for the standard to become a civil engineer. Not a single state went back and adopted that. Political reasons, right? But so it's really easy to get together in a mob mentality and say, this is what we want. No one would go back and do it on their own. Well, that's been repealed and replaced. And so some of those things kind of change. But anyway, they come up with what the definition of a surveyor is. And so most all states and jurisdictions definitions are very similar. There's a lot of overlap because they're based on this model premise. And then they also help mobility and things like that we'll kind of go through. So we talked about exams and exam prep material. Another thing they have is the records program. I got licensed in Utah first, and I didn't get an NCEES record. Well, I had to go back through and re-verify all my other stuff. So after like my second or third state, I'm like, this is nuts. And so I got an NCEES record. So I highly recommend, it's so worth the 110, I don't know what it is. If you're going to ever be licensed as a remote possibility, because I'm like, I'll never get licensed in another state. I'm totally good in one. Well, that's just not the world we live in anymore. Spend the money, get worth it. It's so nice to have it all in there done. So that's the records program that NCEES has. The CPC tracking is another great little tool. One sec, Danny, I'll get your question there. And again, I'm not seeing the chat. So if somebody pops up, let me see if I can get the chat over here. Okay. So Danny, go ahead. What's your question? Let's get these knocked out as we go.
Sure. So as far as the records program goes, I have a profile in NCEES. It helped me get my Colorado license. The one hiccup I had, I set it up about a year ago, and I passed my state exam, and I went to the NCEES page to move everything forward, and I realized that I had to resend all of the references and the my work experience, and I'm wondering why that needs to be reevaluated yearly. I found out there's a little snafu there, and I had to reach out to everybody, and it's kind of a pain in the butt, to be honest with you.
Sure. Well, I can appreciate that, right? So here I am. I'm the chair of the Utah board several years ago when I went and got my record. And I mean, I was 21 years old. I started as a rodman for an individual who was working out of his basement and didn't really, right? I mean, it was a great foundation. I went to school. I went to the BLM, spending time there and went consulting. Well, I'm filling out my NCS record. They wanted to account for all the time I had since I graduated from high school. And I had put, here's all my stuff. I've been licensed for 5 or 6 years. I kind of skipped that. And I'm like, oh my word. Well, I put it in there. And the individual that reviewed it kind of came back and said, hey, you were pretty generic. You're pretty vague. And I'm like, I stood in a field and I held a prism, right? I held one of a tape. When you compare that with what I've been doing the last 5 years as a principal and a licensee, no one really cares about what my job responsibilities as a rodman was. Well, and so Danny, very sympathetic towards that. I'm like, what's going on? Well, to answer your question directly, I think it's every 6 months you have to go back and update that because they need to have it be current. You probably could force it to go, but obviously they want to know if your job description's changed or it's more relevant. If I don't believe you need to go back, if let's say you had a former employee or employer that you worked for a couple of years that you don't need to go back to that individual. It would just need to happen anything that's changed in the last year, just so it's up to date and current. Right? I mean, if you were a train wreck that happened in the last 6 months, people might want to know that, right? Or if you've done awesome things and have really advanced, well, that's going to make it much easier to have that records transfer. I don't know that every state accepts those, but most states, it's so much easier. I know in New Mexico, I think the last state I got licensed in, the application, I kind of filled out a half a page and then just said, hey, I have an NCEES record and transmitted it to them and it was done. I don't have to go through all the extra hoops and, it's all kind of there. So it's way simple. The CPC tracking, continuing education, most states have some type of continuing education. I was kind of curious about it. So I went on and entered in and it's completely up to you. NCS kind of realized, hey, we have individuals, all these candidates who sit for the exam, we have all their data. We could certainly house that. There's no fee for it. And so you go in there and you'll enter the dates, the location, and you can upload receipts and seminars and handouts and whatever you need to do to demonstrate to your specific state. Well, I was on the phone with the Utah secretary. I'm like, hey, I wonder what this is. And so I went ahead and transmitted my CPC tracking to Utah. I mean, you just go in the process, you fill who I want to go to. And she's like, hey, I got this email and it's just this monster PDF of everything. It's like, what is it? I'm like, oh. So we kind of talked through it. So it's a pretty slick way. If you've got another way or your company, I know there's several different ways to keep track of your continuing education, but NCS has a free tool that's super easy to use. Another thing, and this is totally Marissa's world, is outreach support. NCEES has speaker toolkits, swags. I mean, Marissa, maybe you want to jump in and share all the tools that are out there to help you as you go to talk to anybody about being a surveyor.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Scott. And thanks for having me on, Trent. So if you all went to Western States and attended the session that I gave with Josh Twitty, who's our community engagement advocacy specialist, I talked about all the things that we're doing to promote the value of licensure and promoting the profession and things that you can do and what your peers are doing and things like that. Josh talked about threats to licensure. But part of that presentation is, all the awesome things that we're out doing now, especially in a virtual world that we're living in until we can kind of get back out on, in person, which, by the way, I don't know if y'all saw the news, but it looks like Europe is going to open up this summer for US folks to be able to travel there. So that's really exciting news. All that to say is that, yeah, we're doing a ton of virtual things, which you all are probably pretty privy to, but we do have a speaker's kit. It's a lot of what you're seeing here tonight. Some of these slides are used in that speaker's kit. And so it is a PowerPoint. It is available online. And thank you, Trent, for putting that in the chat. I just noticed that popped up. So as a part of that speaker's kit, all you have to do is just put in your name and your email, and it like literally just comes right to you. It's a pretty big file. But I recommend that for college age students. You know, if you're going to talk to high school or younger grades, reach out to me and we'll see what we can do to maybe help you with some activities, because we all know PowerPoints are not going to resonate with a third grader. So in addition to that, we do have some swag meaning pamphlets, brochures, pencils, you know, things like that that you can hand out to classes. And maybe just some little tchotchke things that I might have around the office that I can send you as well. And then on that speaker's link page, you can sign up to volunteer to be a speaker. And so if you live in, you know, whatever part of the country you live in, and you want to kind of give back to your surveying community and you want to volunteer to be a speaker, like, hey, if you have a college in California, I live, you know, in Los Angeles, and I would be willing to travel this far and talk to, you know, whatever schools might need a speaker. So we're always taking volunteers to speak about the profession of surveying and what it takes, and speak to our exams and things like that. And then on the flip side, if you need a speaker, so if you're one of those people who runs across somebody and they're like, wow, will you come talk to my class? And you just don't like public speaking, you don't want to do it, but you want to still help this school, reach out to us in that way, and we can provide you with a speaker. So we can go both directions with that, but that link should have everything that you need to know on there in regards to the speaker's link and how we can get involved and help you all.
Yeah, it's awesome. Like I said, Marissa, you know, I said, hey, she was the one that kind of got here with Trent and into this group, and said, hey, you can't do this to me. You got to help me. Right. I just envisioned myself coming on here and answering everybody's questions or trying to answer it. I'm like, Trent's like, hey, you got to have a presentation. I'm like, Marissa, come on. So she put together a bunch of slides, and I went through. I'm like, okay, yeah, most of these people already know about what a surveyor does and who a surveyor is. Not so much needing that. And so, yeah, there's some of these are kind of those canned slides, but they've got the narration to go along with it and the talking points. You can customize them to meet your needs. I have given several presentations to universities, and yeah, whenever I'm down in Greenville now, South Carolina, at the headquarters, I always grab some handing out swag, right, to give to people to, you know, it's great that they have a huge outreach. And we'll talk about some more about some of those things. The last one on here, not really applicable to most of us, is the credential evaluations. A lot of candidates come from, are foreign candidates that get a degree from, you know, Egypt or Asia or somewhere in the Middle East. And so they evaluate their credentials and education to make sure it fits in with the given license. So that's another, NCEES does quite a lot of bit of that, but it doesn't really affect us. So licensure, why licensure? Well, obviously to have a universal standard, something we can all rely on, right? We don't want to go to a surgeon or attorney that doesn't have the diploma hanging on the wall. You know, my brother's a surveyor. It's kind of funny. He took my old job and now he owns the company that I'm working for the man. I don't know quite how that happened, but it did. And, you know, I was talking to him the other night, and he's like, man, I got people calling me, my phone's just off the hook. And he's got a small little firm. And everybody's like, well, you know, how come it's taking you so long? And every surveyor is busy. Why do I even need a surveyor? And he's like, you know what? Call someone to do your concrete, try and get a contractor out there, or somebody to do your fence. I mean, a mechanic, everybody's just busy right now. Well, again, all those people, you're going to go to someone you know and trust. So hopefully everybody here understands the importance of licensure and why we think to have that a universal standard is a good thing. So obviously in the United States, like I mentioned earlier, it's through state boards. They're all different. NCEES provides a national standard, but it has no enforcement. It's really up to each individual state to accept those and utilize those and have those in place. So let's start getting into a little bit more nitty gritty here. And then I've got a bunch of questions at the end that I get asked a lot. And so hopefully they'll answer or maybe spur you guys with some thoughts. So obviously the FS and PS exam, and I think every state has the state-specific exam to requirement. A couple of them have gone online, but yeah, they're all state-specific one way or the other. The NCEES contact for the New England state. So that's kind of a broad question, Sean. Each state, we can get you definitely if you have, you know, obviously there's the 4 zones. So I could get you in the Western Zone vice president, or I could get you in touch with someone specifically from the state or the board that you're interested into. And so I would recommend that if you're pursuing licensure, probably not to get with my counterpart, you know, that's the board that's on the board of directors, but someone more boots on the ground. So Marissa can probably pull that up for you, or online. If you want to tell us what states you want to know and how to get contact, we can totally get you in with those people. So the last thing I want to talk about is kind of the canned present. Well, there's a couple more, but ethics. During my 8 years on the board, and I'll digress a little bit here, but I remember my first board meeting, I showed up and hopefully this is not offensive to anybody, right? But I was gung-ho about the profession, and there were some individuals that had some disciplinary action. Well, they were on probation. The first individual, and again, mind you, this was 8 years ago, was growing marijuana in his basement, and he worked out of his home. That's a felony, and so that obviously put his licensure in jeopardy. And so he's there. The next individual had child pornography on his work computer, again, a felony. And so crimes of moral turpitude, they're going to pull your license into question, right? So these people were there, and the members of the board were grilling them. They're like, hey, what's your parole officer? How's your family supportive of this? What are your coworkers? How do you do? And I'm just sinking in my chair like, this is so uncomfortable, and this is not right. And the third guy that was there for discipline, he was a civil engineer practicing structural engineering. I'm like, hey, I got this guy. This is so I can do this one. The things that I dealt with from a disciplinary standpoint on the board were ethical. I never dealt with hardly any or very insignificant technical components of, you know, not having the right shear strength or using the wrong formulas. They were ethical issues. And so professional conduct is a big deal. NCEES has rules for professional conduct and unprofessional conduct. And so that's just something I want to remind everybody, and I always take this opportunity to make sure everybody's aware of those things, because they are important. And, you know, we often overlook those in some of the things, but really that's what sets us apart. I mean, as a professional surveyor, I love telling people, I don't care. I don't care which side. I mean, the facts speak for themselves. I'm going to go home tonight. I'm not going to lose sleep over 6 inches one way or the other. No, I always lose sleep over the 6 inches because I don't know how to fix it or what to do. I don't care who owns the 6 inches. It doesn't matter to me. I have no stake in the game. Okay, so 3 steps to getting licensed. And we always refer to it as the 3-legged stool, right? Your first is your education. It differs by state. Some 2-year degrees, some 4-year degrees. I think there's still a couple states, there's no education, or there's different paths that you can get a license without having any education. NCEES, their model is to have a degree from an accredited university. That's just is what it is. The second step is experience. Again, 4 years is what the PS exam is geared toward. A candidate with 4 years of practical experience is kind of what the PS exam is based on. And then the last one, of course, is education or exams, right? So you got to pass the exams. Those kind of all go together. I know in Utah, we kind of arrange things. So there's 3 different paths, but they're all 8 years. You can get a 4-year degree and 4 years experience. You can get a 2-year degree and have 6 years experience, or a graduate degree in 2 years. So no matter how you want to do it in Utah, it's going to take 8 years to get there, but there's 3 different tracks. And so hopefully everybody's kind of been there and done that. So let's now start talking a little bit more about things that are interesting. How's that? Is that fair? Exam trends. Everybody wants to know, what is the profession of surveying? Where is it going? What does it look like? So here's your super secret. Got to know the right person to see the trends of the exams. So I asked them for the last 10 years, and you can see the decline starting in 08, 09 right there, and started working its way down. Obviously, the last blip on this is the COVID blip, and so definitely an anomaly. But we went from having 2,000 licensees to having 1,000. So we were cut in half in that 5 or 6 year span. There have been vigorous debates and everybody has an opinion as to why. Technology, and I think they're all correct, right? I mean, the BLM, when I started, there were 4 or 5 people on a crew, and back in the good old days, they had 10-person crews with front chainman and rear chainman and instrument and rodman and moundsman. And well, now with a robot or GPS, you can really get by with 1 person, maybe 2, right? I mean, and as a result of that, that mentor, that apprenticeship process is not happening. There's no progression to go from a rodman to an instrument man, you know, to a party chief and work your way up through there. It just doesn't happen as much anymore. The other thing that's interesting is the PS, the red, and I'm colorblind, so play along with me. The red line, I guess, is, and there's a lot of surveyors that are colorblind, just so you know. The PS, you'd think there'd be a 4-year lag behind the FS exam, the results. So, okay, if we had in 14, 15, we kind of rebounded the bottomed out of the FS exam, 3 or 4 years later, you would think those candidates would be taking the PS exam and start to go up. Well, it really wasn't happening. So that was kind of a weird anomaly as well. The economy obviously is what, you know, was just right before this when the economy kind of fell apart and kind of started a little bit of that. But as you can see, no matter how you dice it up, in the last 10 years, there have been about half as many surveyors as there were coming into the profession before that. That's alarming, and I think it bodes well for the profession now. I've often said it's an economic discussion, supply and demand. When surveyors are making, you know what I mean, $800,000 a year, there'll be a lot more people that want to be surveyors, and supply is going to go up. Well, I don't know, right? I mean, GIS, technology, there's all those different things that play into that dialogue and discussion. Who knows where it's going to be in the future? Right now, there's a huge backlog. Everybody's busy, and I don't think there's enough surveyors, right? Everybody needs some help right now. And I'm sure that's pretty standard. I know it is in the Intermountain West. I'm assuming that's clear across the country, the same boat. So exam trends, there you go. That's what's happening right now. So the big picture, where, why, how? Well, to be part of a licensure, I mean, Marissa asked me several months ago, she's like, hey, can you give me a little thing about the benefits of being, was it like being licensed? That what you asked Marissa? She's like, I want a paragraph about what it means to you to be licensed. And I'm like, what do you mean? That I had to pay money to take exams, that I have to be regulated? I mean, all these great things that become as being licensed. Well, there's huge benefits. The network, the camaraderie, the opportunity to give back, and the piece to know that what you're doing is truly safeguarding the health, safety, and welfare of the public. And, you know, for an engineer, it's pretty easy to say, well, yeah, if this bridge fails, well, how does a surveyor, how does the health, safety, and welfare of the public? Well, the welfare of the public is when little Mrs. Smith loses half her frontage because somebody has a deed or does a bad survey. That's her welfare, her land, her property. That's what she's got. And so I think that's where surveyors really can come in there. So there's all sorts of resources to help people get there and get done. So that's this total canned presentation. Thank you for letting me get that, Marissa. Thank you for putting that through it. So let's talk about the questions and the stuff that everybody really wants to talk about. So and if you guys want to skip these in order, let me know. I'll just go down through them. If you have some other ones, we can break it up and kind of talk about what you guys want to talk about because you're here. So how does NCEES come up with the questions for the exam? It's a huge process. I am floored at how technical the process is. So they create a PACS study and they hire a consulting firm and a psychometrician, PhD, super smart stats person. They're just way fun to talk to. I have no idea what they're talking about, but they're way fun. And so they come up with the PACS. And I don't know if anybody's been involved with a PACS study. We did one for the PS exam a couple years ago. They will send out a questionnaire to licensees and say, hey, what should a minimally competent surveyor know? And they'll have a task. How often should they use this? And should they be able to do this without any supervision? And I mean, it's a good 45-minute, an hour-long questionnaire to go through all these questions. And so the industry supplies back NCEES and they qualify and rank all those and say, okay, pulling a tape measure, adjusting for sag or temperature correction. Should a minimally competent surveyor know how to do that? And how often do they do that? on a daily basis? Well, based on those things, they plug it into the big, huge matrix and it kicks it out and says, hey, you should ask questions about this on the exams, right? Public land survey states, should they know how to determine a center quarter of a section, closing corner, trig, all those different things. So the national practicing body really comes up with the domains, the content area of an exam. So they say, okay, well, you know, the PS exam's 100 questions. You need to have 8 questions that deal with public lands and 6 about boundary and 4 about laws and statutes. Well, then they bring in subject matter experts. And so hopefully you've got, the next slide, I'll have stuff you can get with Marissa or with me. They bring in subject matter experts. It is the best continuing education I've ever had in my life. It's online now, and maybe that model will stay that way, but they used to take us down to the headquarters, and for 2 or 3 days, you would write questions. They have a great resource library that's there. And so you'll come up and develop questions to ask in that specific domain. Well, okay, that sounds kind of cool and kind of fun. The easiest part is writing the question. The hardest part is coming up with 3 wrong answers. They've got to be legitimate wrong answers, right? You can't have a throwaway, true or false. They've got to have 4 wrong answers or 3 wrong answers and 1 right answer. And it's hard. I mean, it's really hard to come through there. I will write 2 or 3 questions in 2 full days. I mean, it's mind racking. Your people are there. And again, they're great people, just phenomenal to work with, their staff and all these other professionals from across the country. NCEES has a huge understanding and push for diversity. They bring people in from geographic, gender, race, backgrounds, academic, practicing, consulting, government. You know, they got to represent the candidates taking the test. So those experts come in and they develop questions. And it's pretty disheartening when you come up with a great question and somebody says, hey, that's not going to work, and they redline all over it and, you know, come up with regional bias, right? I mean, one guy always was talking from the Northeast, was talking about a deer fence. And we're like, what's a deer fence, right? Well, in the Northeast, it's a big deal to have a deer fence. No one else knew what he was talking about. So that's how they come up with the questions. They'll put them out there and they kind of pre-test them and see how they do. And if it's good, then it stays on the test. If it's bad, it gets dumped on and life goes on. So that's how they come up with the questions. So what is NCEES doing to promote the profession? Well, they hired Marissa. They hired a dedicated person. Marissa's job, I don't know what your specific title is, Marissa. Her job is promote and network and help the surveying profession. That was something 5 or 6 years ago. We went down to Baton Rouge. NCEES formed and funded a task force to talk about the future of surveying. Looking back at that trend, it was on the decline, and we're like, hey, what are we going to do? They got NSPS, BLM, they got every survey-related acronym organization they could get, brought them all together in Baton Rouge for 2 or 3 days and brainstormed. They talked about exams, they talked about marketing and outreach and branding, and, you know, a PE's a PE. Well, are you a PLS, a PS, a RPLS? I mean, there's like 16 different surveyors, and how do we fix that? And how do we talk, you know, an elevator speech? What about a standard logo? And so they looked at all sorts of stuff. They funded that for 2 or 3 years, kind of handed that off to NSPS. It's still there. And so NCEES has funded a full-time position in Marissa to help promote the profession of surveying.
On that note, just a couple more, I guess, minute or two of conversation on that. So strategic planning was done, say, 5 years ago. Numbers were declining. We saw your bar graph a little bit ago. 5 years later, numbers are still declining. What are we looking at from a strategic plan another 5 years out? You know, any idea of what going on?
I have my total personal opinion, and you know, NCEES, right? Our vision and mission is to help promote and protect the health, safety, and welfare for the public. NCEES surveyors are a very small portion of NCEES. If you think of the candidates that take the FE and the PE exam compared to the few hundred surveying exams, we're a pretty small dog in the dog park. NCEES doesn't treat us that way. I think right now on the board of director, of the 8 of us that are there, there's 5 that are surveyors, either dual license or just straight surveyors. So huge kudos to that. And I think they're hired Marissa, right? I mean, that's a huge step. Right. Some of it is no one knows what the problem is. We know a lot of the symptoms are. Well, if you treat the symptom and not the problem doesn't go away. So what's the problem? Is it lack of mentoring mobility? Is it the advancement of technology and GIS? Is there not that much need for surveyors? Are surveyors woefully underpaid? And so all those things I think are symptoms. They're all part of the thing. And maybe one of those is the problem. And maybe there is not a specific problem that needs to be addressed, but all just symptoms. And so they are looking, right? I think Marissa can jump in. They're looking at looking at some national marketing and branding, right?
Yeah. And so before I do that, I do want to be mindful. Danny has a question. Maybe we can quick answer that, and then I'll come back and talk about the research.
Go for it, Danny.
So it's more of a comment than a question. I'm looking at trying to find interns here in Colorado, and I reached out to the local high schools, and the local high schools have an architecture program. They have an engineering program for high school students where they get college credits towards a degree. But of course, none of these programs have anything to do with surveying. There actually was a UAS program in one of the high schools I looked at here in the Colorado Springs. So I took it upon myself to reach out to the schools with the idea of putting a presentation for the engineering and UAS and for the architectural students to say, hey, land surveying's out here too. It's just as sexy as being an engineer. And in fact, with the trends of being less and less surveyors becoming licensed, the sky's the limit. And we're just going to be more in demand as time rolls on. So I guess that's my comment is, I don't know, maybe on the NCEES level, my question would be, is there a way we can maybe create a program nationally to promote the surveying profession at the high school level?
That's what I'm about to do.
Perfect lead. Perfect
Thank
lead.
you for that segue. Oh, I mean, not just me, obviously, but okay. So when I started, so let me just backtrack and say that I've only been with NCEES since July of last year. I do not have a surveying background. I have a corporate marketing background. I worked for an IT distributor for 15 years in their corporate marketing department. So my background is fine marketing tactics and measures and KPIs and all that kind of stuff. That's fine. I can do in strategic planning and all that. I can do that. So taking that skill set to surveying. So obviously having to learn surveying, learn who all the players are and all the people and kind of what makes them tick and building those relationships. But when I started with NCEES, the first thing that I heard on day one is we are going to be starting this massive research project for engineering and surveying. And I did talk about it on Western States, but I'm going to talk about it here too. So my apologies if you're hearing this twice, but we set out with McKinley Advisors, which is a third party, they do research all throughout America, out of DC, and they are working with us to talk to third grade teachers, high school guidance counselors, surveying higher education educators, so adjunct professors, full-time professors, higher ed students pursuing surveying and engineering, and then current professional surveyors, licensed surveyors, or even some non-licensed surveyors such as yourselves, to get their feedback. And these questions are pretty robust. And I know Trent sent out a link to that research. So I hope that you all have taken it. And if you haven't, you still got about another week or two to go ahead and take that. But from that research and from those different vantage points and viewpoints, we're going to find out what makes people tick. How do you talk to a third grader? How do third graders want to know information? Because is it get kids into survey and the coloring books and the posters? Maybe, probably. I don't see how that wouldn't resonate with a third grader. But is it something else? Do we need more hands-on activities? And then with the high school guidance counselors, I think, and none of these results have come back, but my gut tells me, especially just based on your conversation, high school guidance counselors, the adults themselves guiding these children don't even know what surveying is or that it exists. And so that's the number one problem is educating the educator, right? And so that will be part of what we find. And okay, check, we got to check that and come up with a way to do that, right? College age students, how do we continue to push them towards this path? Or selfishly, how do we take an engineering student and change their mind to become a surveyor or make them dual license? So it's that feedback that's going to formulate what we're calling this very robust marketing plan. And from that marketing plan, we'll implement all kinds of measures and all kinds of activities. And we will work with McKinley on how to best do this as well. I mean, yeah, I've got 15 years of background experience, but that doesn't mean that I, know everything to say to make it work, right? We're going to rely on McKinley for a lot of that guidance and support. One of the things, yes.
Hi, Rob McMillan, California Land Surveyors Association. We had a great opportunity, great experience, great opportunity. I guess it was in 2019 to be an exhibitor at the American School Counselors Association.
Yeah.
And then it was so positive an experience that the CLSA went ahead and signed up to be exhibitors at the California School Counselors Association conference a few months later. But one of the things that we needed was something that was like, business card size that we could hand out to school counselors really quickly and just have the 5-second pitch right there on the card.
Yep.
So
that's perfect. And that's the kind of feedback that we want from this research, so that we can take it and go, okay, there's this resounding feedback that says we need a 5-second elevator pitch. We need X, Y, and Z. We need 15 activities that we can do for grades 3 through 8, right? And so that's the kind of stuff that we want to take and we want to be able to formulate and put some traction around. And that could mean, also just as a whole of NCEES, maybe our branding changes, or maybe our colors change, or, whatever. We're like, this isn't just what are we going to do to change the needle? It's like, when we say robust, it's truly robust. And so, but the thing that I've said on a call, and I'll say it again, is that, this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. So when everyone's like, well, why aren't things changing? Well, because you've got a 3rd grader right now that's going to be a surveyor. He or she has a long way to go before they're actually out practicing in the field or especially becoming licensed. And so, we're not going to see this upward tick probably for another 10 years or so. And I hate saying that because it sounds so disheartening, but we've got to work on, children at this point.
Can I talk to Paula?
I'm sorry?
Nope, you're good. Yep. Somebody talking in the background. I muted him. You're good.
Okay. So all that to say is that, that's our captive audience right now, our, middle school, high school kids, and they've got a long way to go. I mean, look at y'all when you all got licensed, I feel like that average age, especially if you go back and look at our stats, is 35-ish. And so when we talk about changing that, it is going to take some time.
So Danny, grab a pencil, write down these 2 words: twist.
Oh yeah.
TWIST program. It's pretty heavy in the Northeast. It's teaching with integrated spatial technology. And there are several state societies that they pay math and related topic teachers. They send them to like a summer week-long boot camp to teach them how to teach math with surveying principles.
Excellent. Thank you.
We had that here in the West, and it was actually, we sponsored it as part of West Fed, but we kind of,
So the TWIST,
down, go ahead.
Yeah, the TWIST program is awesome. They were taking them down to UNLV. The other one is TrigStar. NCEES sponsors and support a lot of the local ones. So it is same thing. You're going to go in and create a program inside of a high school with the math club kind of a deal. And again, they teach survey principles and there's monetary awards, and they compete at the local and then the national level. And so those are two ways. I have often said surveying is in your blood, right? There are so many individuals that have started becoming an engineer, and they take that beginning intro to survey class and they just fall in love with it, right? And
That's how I got into it.
Yep. Yeah. Your mother, your uncle, your grandpa could have been a surveyor, and you have nothing to do with it, right? It's just not in your blood, right? But yeah, the surveyors are surveyors because they love it. And that's a good thing and a bad thing, right? Because we're kind of like, oh, we don't care what anyone else thinks, we're gonna do our own thing. Well, there's consequences that come with that. So the TWIST program, again, that's the educators and counselors. And then the Trickstar is actually working with youth, high school age students. So there are a couple programs out there right now that are going on.
And I'm going to piggyback on that and talk about Future City too. And Scott, I mean, gosh, you know Future City better than probably most all of us on this call, I think. But you know, the Future City program, it is an engineering competition, but they do have a surveying leg of it, right? And it's the Best Land Surveying Practices Award, and that's an award that we sponsor. So we do help sponsor that Future City competition, and that's geared for 6th to 8th graders. And so there again is another captive audience. And I think this year there were 45,000 students that participated across the United States in this competition, and over 1,000 educators registered for this year's competition. So that's some fantastic mind share for that middle school group. So it's things like TWIST, Trickstar, Future City that we did before I came on, and we're going to keep doing that because obviously those are great revenues and outlets for us to go down. But maybe there's more programs out there that we don't know, or maybe like the counselors associations that Rob was talking about. That's a no-brainer to me, right? So it's things like that. And if you want to be involved in things like that, we can certainly get you involved in things like that too.
Right. And
I
go
would
ahead, Kat.
just like to say that Marissa and I are going to get to know each other very well. So this is what I'm doing at my company, everything you've discussed tonight. So trust me, putting this together.
Yay!
So, and maybe jumping ahead to how can I get involved, right? I have often said, how hard would it be to take 2 hours to go to your local high school and just call up the math department after school, right? And say, hey, this is what I'm doing. I'd like to present. They would eat that up. For you to come in with a total station or a drone, right? To go out there to the math club or even to one of their classes. And when they're talking trig, right? I mean, I love geometry as a 9th grader. Well, duh, it makes perfect sense now, right? Because I'm a surveyor. I can see it. I can apply it. It's totally there. And so I think there's a great way to introduce that. But again, we each individually have to take that initiative. State societies have outreach. NSPS has stuff. NCEES has stuff. It's you just finding the 3 hours in your busy time to go coordinate with some local school body, scout group, whatever it is, and go teach it. Do the merit badge, whatever the case may be. There's all sorts of opportunities out there. We're all just too busy to take advantage of them.
Yeah, and one of the things that Christy Davis with the North Carolina Society started in that state is career ambassadors. And so every county within the state of North Carolina, she has appointed a career ambassador. So it's similar to that speakers link that I was talking about, right? Of, well, I'm in Fairbanks, Alaska. Well, who am I going to call? John Brady. He's in Fairbanks, Alaska, right? So it's similar to that, but it's at that state level. So if you sit on a state society, that's an easy thing to do. And then you can fill that, you know, kind of backfill it with those people. And then you're on the ready and you're ready to go.
Back to the Trickstar stuff. That's one of the presentations I want to do in August is basically have a presentation for us as surveyors on how to create a Trickstar program for each one of your, you know, your school districts and type of thing, and how to kind of go about that. So that's one of the presentations I want to present in August. And I'll do it in August just as it gets closer to get ready to go back to school, but give us as surveyors that, you know, power that we need to go kind of get in front of the schools and the math departments. Go for it, Rob.
Grant, Sherry Todges is online.
Yep.
She's one of the powerhouses with Trickstar in California.
Yep.
And maybe she could tell you what's going on with what we're doing.
If Sherry wants to, oh, she's unmuted.
Hi, sorry. Hi, this is Sherry. Yes, it's quite exciting. We are actually in the process of doing some trial online testing. So Trickstar is actually turning towards online testing. So it's quite exciting. We do have some little hiccups as with everything, but we're right in the middle of that trial to hopefully offer the 2021 online. So it's the first in its history to do the online testing, but it's exciting and we're trudging through it.
Let's go.
So if you have any questions on TreeStar, feel free to reach out to me, and I'm willing to offer you all of my information and experience.
Perfect.
And by the way, I was volunteered for that probably about 12 or 13 years ago. And with being volunteered, it was actually, I fell in love with it. It's an awesome program. Get to meet with lots and lots and lots of high school students. And they can see how passionate you are about this profession. And hopefully, I mean, you're not going to make them all surveyors, but it opens up their eyes.
Exactly. At least gets them the some awareness to it, which is what, even get kids into surveys about, just bringing some awareness to the profession, no matter what it is at that point. So, yep.
And part of that connection that really makes the learning experience that they're just kind of grinding through at times, makes that connection between, what I'm learning here and how that relates to the real world. And where am I going to actually use this in the real world, and how is it going to benefit me? Well, you're going to use this skill in this manner, and you can get into an amazing career that pays very well and help change your world.
Exactly. One thing back to your stuff, Marissa, what the reports are due from McKinley over the next month or so, or what?
Yeah. So the survey cutoff date, it's so funny when I say survey and surveyors.
Yeah.
Like, it's such a mouthful.
The paper survey. Yeah.
So the survey cutoff date, I think, is May 5th.
Okay.
It's that first week of May. So I would suspect by early June, we should have some of those results back. It's my goal to obviously report on that as soon as I possibly can. I know everybody's kind of chomping at the bit, like, have you gotten the survey results back? We want to know what's going on, because, we've not ever been able to really put our hands around and wrap our heads around, who is getting involved in this profession, who's not, what are the demographics. So if you've taken that survey, you do see there's some demographic information on there. And Trent, I know you've written a lot of different things about diversity in surveying and those types of demographics. So that'll be good information to have. But I would suspect by midsummer, that we'll be able to kind of go public with maybe that information. So
Do you know the results of when the NSPS diversity one will be done?
So it's my understanding that that's complete. Now, what they plan to do with it or share, I'm not privy to.
Okay. Yeah. Got it. Cool.
So Annalisa, totally agree with you, right? I mean, we've talked PowerPoints. There's nothing better than go take some equipment, show up hands-on, be a part of it, be there. And Jesse, to come back to your question about the CST program, great program. My personal opinion is I don't see that replacing the FS and PS. Again, that would not be, I guess it would be NCEES, but again, it's up to state licensing board. So as an individual board, if they saw that as an issue or a problem, right, they would propose or put a motion forward to NCEES to say, hey, we want to change this path to licensure. I think the three-legged stool, right, to say, hey, you've got the experience, you've got the education, the examination, right? I don't know, in lieu of the FS and PS, right? I mean, if you were to say, hey, or make the argument, hey, I passed the CST 1, 2, or 3, that should count for this. Well, go ahead and take the FS. If you pass it, giddy up, right? I mean, if you can pass the exam, you can pass the exam, and that demonstrates that minimal competency, which is what everybody's after. They don't care about who the best is, just that you're minimally competent to do that.
Yeah, good. Just on that topic too, Amanda Allred is going to present June 28th on the whole CST process as well. So just a heads up on that.
Perfect. So I don't know how long you guys want to go. We can, if you got more questions, or if you want me to bust these last ones out, or whatever you want to do.
Yeah, if you want to bust, maybe just bust through the last few, and then if it spurs any more questions. But
Sure. So what advice before you take the exam? Take a deep breath, relax. I remember outsmarting myself. I mean, knock on wood, I passed all my exams the first time. I'm not a smart person by any means. I almost thought they were trying to trick me. I guarantee you there is not a trick question on any of those exams, period. There's just simply not. They're not trying to lead you or trick you. From a defensibility standpoint and a psychometric standpoint, that's not testing you on that minimal competence. They're trying to test you on a principle or a foundation understanding. They're not trying to second guess and say, hey, can you read between the lines? And did you pick up this little special thing that your 8th grade teacher tried to do to you? That's not in the PS. So if you're going down that path, just stop, shut yourself down, take a deep breath, and go back and say, what's the fundamental premise they're trying to test me on right here, right now? To me, I wish someone would have told me that, because I was worried sick about it. Take the practice exams, the FS, the PS exams. You can get those online. Most universities, especially so many are going to online, just go take an ad hoc class, right? Go take a FS prep class from your local university, enroll in school and take it one night, right? And just take that class. Huge benefit. I would highly recommend doing that. How I can get involved, we kind of already talked about that. If you're interested, NCS is always looking for new subject matter experts to keep things coming in. Get with Marissa, reach out. They have more people that are interested than spots for people to participate, right? They can't bring down 400 people and have them work on exams. It's a small, pretty intimate 20, 25 person group sometimes working on an exam. And so they got to have some continuity, but they're always trying to look to infuse new people and new ideas. So if you're interested in doing that, like I say, it's pretty intimidating, but it's so rewarding and it's great. And the networking is phenomenal. I've got lifelong friends. You go spend 24 hours a day with, for 3 days for a couple of people, you just get to know them really well. NCEES, is it changing to match the surveying technology? We had a huge push. There were some individuals from some of the southern states that were really pushing that, saying, hey, we need to test on this new technology. And in the last PAC study for the PS, we put a whole bunch of technology type questions on the PAC study. They fell flat, right? As surveyors, we don't care if you're using a UAV, a robot, terrestrial mobile LiDAR, or a tape. It doesn't matter what tools you use. It's the principle of how you apply it and what you do with it. So it really doesn't get involved. So to answer the question, yes, NCEES now, instead of saying using your total station, now they could say using a drone or using a UAV or a robot. They just changed what the tool is, but it doesn't change the question. So they are keeping those relevant. They're looking at them. But as far as asking new questions about new technology, well, all it is a new way to measure or gather data. It doesn't change how you process or what you do with the end result. And the last one, I had this typed in here a couple different ways, right? Is my exam grade on the curve? How's it done? What happened? All this other stuff. I can give you the answer is no. It's not graded on the curve. It's not, it's very exact. NCEES, I mean, I can speak of a few instances. I know they've come back and let's say, they found out this test had a multi-key. Answers B and C were right on this exam. Well, they discover that 3 years from now, right? So what they do is they go back for the last 3 years and every exam that question was on, and they're not on every exam. Each exam is totally unique now. They look and say, did a person who not pass the exam, would they have passed the exam if they got this right? And I think only one, and it was not on a survey exam, but once in the history of NCEES, they gone back and said, hey, you actually did pass. We had this question was not a valid question. It doesn't happen very often, but they are very strict. They look at that kind of stuff. It's high stakes testing. They're really a no nonsense. They don't leave stuff for chance or guessing. They spend a lot of money. They have to have millions of dollars on reserve for an exam breach, right? If the questions get compromised, they have to be able to spend the amount of money that will take to get subject matter experts in to write a whole new bank and questions to publish a new exam. So, I mean, it's a big deal to NCEES to take it serious. Your exam is graded, and like I say, they're all unique. I can get a little nerdy on you right now, and I don't think it's any secret. The exams are, they call them loft exams, linear on the fly. So you register for the exam, right? I'm going to take it June 1st, and you show up at Pearson VUE. When you log in and you do your palm vein scan, that test is created for you right then and there. And what it does is, you know, you've got the exam blueprint that you've all seen, right? That says, hey, the PLSS has this many questions, and boundary and staking and professional, right? And the subdomains. It says, hey, I've got to build an exam that has 6 questions in this domain, and it has to have one from each one of these, and it builds a unique exam. If you came back in the next day, which you can't, right? There's a little window there every 3 months or something, you can take the exam. You would have some questions that would be the same, but by and large, they won't. Well, again, and the algorithm knows when you take the exam, you're not going to get the same questions that you already took. The person sitting next to you will likely have some, and there's some questions that they have enough, that's been tested enough times. They call them equators. The people that pass the exam do really good on those questions. The people that fail the exam do really bad on those questions. So they're great questions that really divide and keep things out. They have enough of those on every exam so that all the exams are equal. They're all weighted equally. And so, yeah, there's no voodoo in, is your exam graded? What if I take it with a bunch of really smart people? Does that mean I do what? Nope, doesn't have anything to do with it. It's all individual, up to you, what you do. So I don't know. Hopefully that answers your questions. A sneak peek at NCEES. I know it is not a super sexy topic by any sense, by any imagination, but you know, it's a group that I got involved when I was young and put on the board. And in Utah there are 5 engineers, 1 member of the public, and 1 surveyor. And the surveyor that I replaced encouraged me to get involved. And so I really jumped in NCEES, again, because of my age, certainly not my personality or skills, but they really got me involved. And so I've been able to do quite a bit with NCEES and be pretty heavily involved. And I think it's great. And like I say, I think there's a lot of people that just don't know what NCEES is or what they do. So hopefully I've been able to pull the curtain back a little bit on that.
That was good. So one of the things you kind of talk about is changing, technologies and that kind of stuff. And, the core model being, protect the welfare of the people. There's a few of you guys that are on here that are SUEs, right? Subsurface utility engineering people. Where is that maybe on the forefront of NCEES, right? I mean, that's an obviously integrated role of protecting the public and health and safety and everything else when it goes with underground utility. So where is that maybe on NCEES's radar?
Sure. No, they've had, I know at one of the last meetings, it seems like ASCE has a full-on subcommittee dedicated to this and the standards. They brought whoever was over the chair of that task force or committee to the NCEES and to talk about it. Right now there are several engineering exams that are offered, right? And obviously the civil and the structural, the nuclear, I think they had like 20 people take the nuclear exam. I was on an audit committee and actually had to audit that exam. Talk about crazy stuff that'll blow your mind, right? I have no idea what the questions mean. I'm auditing to see, did the right subject matter experts, do they have the right information? Are the questions valid? And, I'm auditing the process in the exam, not the questions of the exam, because I have no idea about it. And so I don't know that they've gone through the level. And again, I think right now the process is if 10 licensing boards say, hey, we want to test on subsurface utility engineering, we want an exam, they can petition NCEES and say, hey, we want to have this exam, and the council has to approve and say, yeah, there's a need for it, we want to do it. And the exams are offered totally different. Those nuclear exams are offered once a year, right? And they're all hard copy paper. You show up, everybody takes the exact same exam because there's just not a very big volume. The FE exam, right? There's thousands of people a day taking that exam across the world. So
yeah, I was just curious where eventually I'm sure it's going to become part of the licensing would be my guess over the years. But
in California, Trent, to do subsurface utility data analysis requires a geophysical engineer.
Got it.
Or geophysicist.
Trent, some of involved with these, I'm licensed in these several states, and my consulting firm, does a lot of heavy highway stuff. And so we have an in-house SUE department. They'll go out and do some test holes and potholes. And as a licensee, I have to have direct responsible charge. And there's a couple states that I'm pretty heavily involved with their SUE group because they do that. Because their state requires, they consider it part of surveying. And some states say, hey, if the project control's been established, you don't need to have a surveyor do it, right? If you have a survey for the whole entire highway corridor, and this is just going in and tying, that's fine. Other ones say, nope, it has to be done by a surveyor. And so it really goes back to each state specific board of how they regulate and what they determine the definition of surveying is.
Yeah, no, it's perfect. Good follow-up. I threw in the NCEES squared reports in the chat room, which is always some good data. And one of the things that Scott had brought up earlier, right? Surveyors are just a small part of NCEES. So 2020 total engineering licenses is 893,961. Total surveyors, 48,479. So that being a small part for sure. But anybody have more specific questions for either Scott or Marissa that they want to talk about? Wow. It's quiet. I guess, well, that will be with no questions. Usually that doesn't happen very often, but with that, I guess we appreciate both of you being on and hopefully gain some additional information. And obviously this will be on the website for people to enjoy later. Sherry says thanks with her hand clapping. So
Thank you, Trent. Thank you, Scott.
yeah, thank you.
No,